How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chaf Aleph, Daf 21 of Masechta Gittin. Friends. Today's daf is relatively interesting. Let's go weiter. Alright, we're going to start in daf. What's that sound? Like an airplane or something? Interesting. Very interesting airplane. Alright, airplane. Go, fly away. Alright, friends, we're going to start in Daf Chaf Mud Beis, about 4 lines before it gets wide. 4 lines before it gets wide. Boy Rami Bar Chome asked a kasher. So if there was a tablet, and it was hers, it was her tablet. So she had a tablet. The get cost of aleh, and there was a divorce document written on, right? They wrote a get on the tablet. Now he's showing up with it in Beis Din, and he's giving her this get. But one second, isn't it her tablet? He has to give it to her. It can't be her. He has to give her something. If it's hers, he's not giving her anything. It's hers already, right? So do we say that, well, she was makne the tablet to him, and so now it's his, and now he can give it back to her. Right now he gives it to her. So Oduma lo yodel, maybe she didn't know that she needs to make a kinyan and make it be his so that he can give it to her as a get. So what do we say? Do we say that she was makne to him and therefore he can give it to her now? Or do we say that she didn't know it to be makne to him and therefore it's still hers and he's not really giving her anything? It's already hers. Omer Abaye says, Abaye Toshma, come in here. Afu heid al kfar kotin shoy b'tzad Yerushalayim, that he testified. Who's he? So first of all, this is Masechta Edius. So all these testimonies, right, from that day that in Masechta Brachis, that Rabbi Gamliel was removed from being the Nasi. Fine. So Rashi Taka says it's Rabbi Yehuda ben Bove, but there's a different gersa that says it's Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim. What do you want me to tell you? So he testified about a small little village, maybe Beit Zayit or Motza, that was outside of Yerushalayim. And there was an elder there. And he would lend money. It's probably Beit Zayit. He would lend money to all the people in the village. And he would write the documents, and other people would sign them. So meaning, generally, if Ruvain lends Shimon $1,000, so Shimon then writes a document saying that yes, he owes Ruvain $1,000, and he gives Ruvain this document. But over here we seem to have the opposite. Ruvain's lending $1,000 to Shimon, and then Ruvain's writing a document and giving it and signing it and giving it to Shimon to give back to him. So that seems to be the opposite, right? It should be that Shimon's writing the document and giving it to Ruvain, but here Ruvain's writing the document and having Shimon give it back to him. So the Maisa came to the Chacham, v'chshiru, and they said, no problem, it's okay. This elder can write these documents. But Sefer Mikna, but one second, don't we need it to be a Sefer Mikna? Don't we need the borrower to be makne this document to the lender? And over here, it's the lender's already. He's the one writing the document. Well, because we say that this elder who was lending the money and writing this document was then makne the document. He transferred ownership of the document to the borrower, who then once he had it, returned it to, then gave it to this elder. And therefore we want to say that just like this elder was being makne this document to the borrower, who is then giving it back to the elder, so here also the wife is being makne the tablet to the husband, who's then giving it back to her as a get. Rava says maybe these two are not the same. Dilma Zakin shiny de yodela aknuye. Maybe it's different in the case of the Zakin because he's an elder. He knows halacha. He's a Talmud Chacham. He knows that he needs to make a kinyan, and he knows he needs to be makne it to the borrower so that the borrower can then give it back to him. Maybe the wife doesn't know this. Elo Amar Rava rather says Rava Mehacha from here. Orev hayotze la'achar chisum shtoris gove minichosim b'nei chorin. Param pam param. Who can tell me what that's talking about? It's talking about an Orev. Who can tell me what an Orev is? Well, if Shimon borrows $1,000 from Reuven, Levi then guarantees the loan, right? Shimon borrows $1,000 from Reuven, and Levi says, "Look, if Shimon isn't good for the money, I'll take the achrayus ami. He's the guarantor." So now, but in this case, what happened was Shimon borrowed $1,000 from Reuven. Shimon then wrote a document that he owes Reuven $1,000 and gave Reuven the document. The document is now in Reuven's possession. It's only at this point, after the fact, right? It says, what does it say? It says, la'achar chisum, what does it say? It says, la'achar chisum shtaris. They already had signed the document and given it to Reuven. Now Levi comes and he adds on to it. What is it? What does Rashi say? He says, va'ani arev. I'm an arev. I'm the guarantor. So now, what's happening? Levi really needs to be given the document to Reuven, but here Reuven has the document. He's giving it to Levi to write va'ani arev, that I'm the guarantor, and then he gives it back to Reuven. Right? So what does it say? Where am I? And based on that, if necessary, Reuven can collect from Levi essentially. So how does that work? Well, it must be that Reuven was being makneh the document to Levi to write Va'ani Arev and give it back to him. So we see that, and Reuven isn't a zaken or a fancy Talmud Chacham, he's just a regular Joe. So we see that regular Joes know to be makneh. So here also we can assume that the wife was makneh the tablet to the husband, who then gives it to her as a get. Omer Rav Ashi, my kusha, the magavra shiny the yada la knuye. Rav Ashi says, but still, maybe that is not a good point. Yes, Reuven knew to be makneh the document to Levi to write that he's a guarantor and give it back to him. But Reuven is a fellow. How do I know that this wife who's a fella? How do I know that this wife who's a fella knows halacha? How do I know that fellas know halachas like fellows? And therefore, even though Reuven, who's a fellow, knows the halacha, maybe this wife who's a fella doesn't know that she has to be makneh to her husband to then give it to her as a get. Rather, says Rav Ashi from here, we have a Mishnah that we're going to learn in, I think, 1 day, 2 days, some days, ich weiß nicht. Tomorrow. Tomorrow? No, 2 days from now. Okay. It says, okay. Hello, Rav Ashi mi'ocha. Isha koseves as gito. Ve'ish kosev shofro, that a wife could write her own get. And a husband, when he pays her ksube after they get divorced, he can write the receipt, right? Normally she would have to write the receipt that she received it, but he can write his own receipt, right? And in both cases, right, she's going to be makneh to him, he's going to be makneh to her. Shein kiyum haget el b'chosomov, because the kiyum haget is not the signature, is not the body of the get. Fine, but what do we see? We see that the Mishnah says that a wife can write a get and then be makneh. We assume that she knows to be makneh to the husband. So there you have it, that we can assume that a wife knows to be makneh the get to her husband. Fine. Omar Rove says Rove. Kosav lo get. This is an interesting case, Lamaise. Omar Rove says Rove. Kosav lo get unisanu biyad avdo. Vechosav lo shtar matona olov kino aseu miskareshes bo. Do you hear this case? Do you read me? Do you hear this case, friends? Very interesting stuff. The husband has a get written. He gives it to his Eved. His Eved is now holding it. And then he gives, what was it? Shtar matana. He then gives a separate document where he gifts the Eved to his wife that he's divorcing. which means that when she receives the Eved as a gift, she's receiving the Eved, but also the document, the get that he's holding. And it's kind of like a chotzer, like a courtyard, right? If the husband writes a get for his wife and puts it in his courtyard, in his chotzer, and then he gives the chotzer to his wife as a gift, so she now owns the chotzer as well as the document that is in the chotzer. So the same thing here. The husband writes a get, he gives it to his Eved, he then gives the Eved to the wife as a gift. The wife now gets the Eved as well as the get, and she's now divorced. So again, Rava says, Rava, kosav lo get, if the husband writes a divorce document, v'nusano biyad avdo, and he gives it to his Eved, v'chosav lo shtar matana olav, and then he writes a document giving the Eved to his wife, so then she acquires the Eved as well as the get, and she's now divorced. But one second, how come? One second. If we're saying that she acquires the get and gets divorced because we treat the Eved like a chotzer, but the Eved is a moving chotzer, it's a chotzer that moves, and a chotzer that moves doesn't make kinyans. If you're going to say, well, the Eved wasn't moving, was standing still. But Rava says, but it says Rava that that if when he's moving, he's not right. She would not be kone, right? If we're saying that the Eved is a movable chotzer, and therefore she can't be kone the get via the Eved. So even if he stands still, Omed v'yoshev lo kona. Even if he stands still or he's sitting, it makes no difference, right? If he can move, so then it's a movable chotzer, and she can't be kona the get. But the Gemara says, well, it's talking about where the fellow is tied up, and therefore he can't even move if he wants to. So therefore, yeah, okay, in that way she could be kona the Eved and as well as the get. V'amar Rav, says Rava, kosav lo get unesono b'chatzero, that if a husband writes a get and he puts it in his chotzer, v'chosav lo shtar matana olav, and then he gives the chotzer to his wife as a gift. Kino aseyu, so then she acquires the chotzer, umizgareshes bo, as well as the get, and she is now divorced. Utzricha, we need both of these cases, the case of the Eved as well as the case of the chotzer, that in both cases, right, he's giving either the Eved or the chotzer to his wife, and memele, she's also acquiring the get, and they get divorced. So why do I need both of those cases? The Ashma'ina and Eved, well, if I only had the case of Eved, Avamina Davka Eved. I would think Davka, in the case of Eved, she can get divorced that way. Have Al Chotzer, but by a Chotzer Ligazer, we should say that she is not divorced if he puts the get in the Chotzer and then gifts the Chotzer to her. Mishum Chatzera Abba La'achar Mikan, out of the concern of Chatzera Abba La'achar Mikan. Who can tell me what that is? What that is that if the husband writes a get, and he doesn't put it in his chotzer, he puts it in his friend's chotzer, and then his friend gives the chotzer to her. So in that case, she would not be divorced because she's not getting the get from him, right? He's depositing it by a friend, a middle party, and then she's getting it from the friend. She's not receiving the get from her husband, and in that case, she would not be divorced. So I might think that since in the case where he puts it in his friend's chotzer, and then she acquires the friend's chotzer, she's not divorced. I might think that also in the case where he puts it in his own chotzer, and then she acquires the chotzer, I might think that in that case, we also say not to do it. So Kamash Milan, that is fine. V'yash minan chotzer, and if we would only have the case of the chotzer, have a minadavka chotzer. I might think that specifically if he puts the get in his chotzer and then gives it to her, in that case she's divorced. Aval eved ligazer kafus atu she'enu kafus. But I might think that by an eved, we should say that even if the eved is tied up and can't move and therefore is stationary and she can acquire the get via the eved, but I might think that even in that case, she would not be divorced out of concern for the case where he is not tied up. So therefore, Kamaj Malon, that in both of those cases, the case of the Eved as well as the case of the Chotzer, she would be divorced. It would be a good get. Amar Abai says, Abai Michde, let's see. Chotzer Mehecha is Rabbi. So the Gemara, Abai says, 1 second. How do we know that a Chotzer, right, that she could be koneh through a Chotzer, right? For example, if the husband were to deliver the get not to his wife but to her chotzer, takes the get and puts it in her chotzer, well, she acquires it via her chotzer, and she's divorced. How do we know this, right? Chotzer mehecha is Rabbi. How do we know that works? That the husband can put the bill of divorce in his wife's chotzer? Miyada, from, right, it says v'nosan biyada, right? We learn that from her hand. Ma yada de'isa bein midaita uvein bal korcha, just like her hand, that she acquires the get if he puts it in her hand, whether she wants to receive it or whether it's against her will. If she receives the get, she is divorced. So I'll say apchatzera deisa bein midaita uvein bal korcha. So I'll say that also the situation of a chotzer where she is divorced is when is the chotzer that she owns. That if he takes the get and he puts it in a chotzer that she owns, then she will be divorced, whether she wanted him to put it in there or whether she didn't want him to put it in her chotzer. She will be divorced, just like if he puts it in her hand, she is divorced. If he puts it in her chotzer, she is divorced, whether it's with her desire or not. Viha matono midaita isa bal korcha lesa. But 1 second, but this case where if he puts the get in his chotzer and then gives her the chotzer as a gift, well, she doesn't have to accept the gift. She can say, I don't want to accept the gift. And therefore, since in the context of a gift, it's not something that works even against her will, Abaye asks, I would think that would not work. That only a chotzer where it works against her will, such as when she owns the chotzer, that is where he could put the get in her chotzer and she is divorced. But if he puts it in his chotzer and gives it to her as a gift, I would say that she would not be divorced because she doesn't have to receive that gift. She could say, I don't want it. Maskef Rav Shimon bar Ashi, but Rav Shimon bar Ashi disagrees with Abaye's assertion. Ve'oshlichis lekabalo dimidaito isa bal korcha lesa. But what about agency, right? What about the fact that a wife can appoint an agent, a shaliach, a messenger, to receive her divorce document for her? Now, this shaliach would have to appoint this shaliach willingly, not against her will. And therefore, right, and yet, v'kav shliach lekabala, and yet it is still a good shaliach. So if Abaye, meaning Rav Shimon bar Ashi is asking Abaye, if everything that relates to bills of divorce has to work whether willingly or not willingly, such as putting the divorce in her hand, whether she wants it or not, putting it in her chotzer, whether she wants it or not. But Abaye, you want to argue that if he puts it in his chotzer and gives it as a gift, it would not work because she doesn't have to receive the gift. But then what about making a messenger, right? She's allowed to make a messenger, and that messenger could receive her get for her, but that's something that is not against her will. If she doesn't want to appoint the messenger, you can't make her. And yet it works when she appoints a messenger. So it sounds like not everything relating to get needs to work both with her will and against her will. But Abaye responds and he says, yeah, but there's a humongous difference here, which is that a shaliach is not learned out from yoda, is not compared to her hand. It's learned out from a different word. I could have said vishilach, but it says vishilcha. That's how we learned out. We learn out shlichus. We don't learn out shaliach from her hand. So the idea of having of being with her will as well as against her will, that comes from yoda, from her hand, right? Just like if he puts the get in her hand, it's with her will or against her will. And we learn out chotzer from her hand. So therefore, I'll apply that same idea to chotzer as well, that it has to be something that is with her will as well as against her will, but not a gift. But shlichus is from an entirely different thing, and therefore I wouldn't assume that shlichus has to be with her will. I'm sorry. Therefore, I wouldn't assume that, meaning this concept of having to work with her will as well as against her will does not apply to shlichus. Now, alternatively, shlichus lekabala nami ashkacham bal korcha. Actually, we do find against her will when it comes to a shliach lekabala. Shekain av mekabel get levito ketana bal korcha. After all, a father can receive a get for his minor daughter, his daughter who's a minor, against her will. He can accept it for her, and therefore, we see that even by shlichus there is a concept of bal korcha, and therefore Abaye says, I don't understand how by chotzer he can put it in his chotzer and give it to her as a gift. He can't force her to accept that gift, and therefore I would think that in that case it would not count as a divorce. And I don't know. I don't see an answer to Abaye's kasha. So the Mishnah said that you could write a bill of divorce on the leaf of an olive. But also, you could write it on the hand of an eved and give her the eved. You could write it on the horn of a cow and give her the cow. So b'shloma yad the eved lo efshir lemekatze. So I understand why by the eved you could write it on the hand of the eved and give the eved to the wife. Because once you write the get on the hand of an eved, you can't cut it off. So mainly you give her the whole eved. But elakeren shel pareh, but the horn of a cow. Why not cut off the horn and give it to her, right? Write the get on the horn, cut off the horn, give her the horn. Why give her the whole cow? Because the pasuk says, as we learned, I think on the first half of the Masechta, or maybe the second, that you write the document and you give it to her immediately. Not, the only missing things are writing it and giving it. Yotzozeh, to the exclusion of, if you write it on the horn of a cow when it's still attached, you would have to write it and then cut it off of the cow before being able to give it, and that middle step is not okay, right? We need v'chosav v'nosan. You write it, you give it. And therefore, if you write the get on the horn of a cow, you have to give the whole cow. You can't then remove the horn and give it. If you want to remove the horn, you have to remove it beforehand. Because once you write it, you got to give it immediately. Fine. Okay. Reb Yossi Aglili Omer v'chulei, says Reb Yossi Aglili that you cannot write a get on something that is alive, right? That's a living organism. Fine. My time is Reb Yossi Aglili. Why does Reb Yossi Aglili say that you cannot write a get on a living organism? The Tanya, as we learned in the Brayso, says sefer. The pasuk says sefer. You have to write it on sefer, which is betzim a klaf, parchment. And the other sefer, all I know is about parchment. How do I know that I could write it on an olive leaf? So it says, well, you write it. You write it on whatever you want. And well, if you could write on whatever you want, then why does it say sefer, which is like a parchment? Well, just like parchment is something that is not a living organism and it doesn't eat. One second. Give me a second. What does Rabbi Yossi Glid says? V'lo ochlim. Oh wait, maybe ve'eno ochel here means that it is not food. 1 second, let me make sure over here. It means that it's not food, not that it doesn't eat, but that it's not food. Okay, so therefore, when it says sefer ma sefer davar she'en bo ruach chaim ve'eno ochel, right? It's not a living organism, and it's also not food, right? Because Rabbi Yossi Aglili had said that there are two things that you cannot write a get on: living organisms as well as food. So I've called davar she'en bo ruach chaim ve'eno ochel. You can write a get on anything as long as it is not a living organism and as long as it is not food. But you can write it on if you want to write it on an olive leaf, gesundheit. Rabbanon iksiv bas sefer kedukamet. Rabbi said, look, if it said bas sefer, not just v'chasav a sefer krisus, but v'chasav bas sefer, so then that would be limiting, right? And it would exclude living organisms and food. Hashav d'chsiv sefer, but now that it just says sefer, a more general term, l'sfiras devarim hu de also. It's just to account things, and that could be on. You can write it on whatever you want. So what do the rabbis do with v'chosav, right? Because they learn it out from sefer that you can write it on whatever you want. So what do you do with v'chosav? So miboy lehu b'chsiva miskareshes ve'enu miskareshes b'kesef. It means that that you can that she definitely gets divorced with writing a document and not with money. Because Sagadaite Chamina, I may have thought Akish Yitzia La'avoya. I might think that let's compare divorce to marriage, right? Because the Pasuk says V'yotzim beso v'yotzim beso v'haisa leish acher. What? Chazva sefer Krisos v'nosan biyado v'shilchem beso v'yotzim beso v'haisa leish acher. Is that correct? Did I read that? But we compare v'yotzim v'haisa. We compare it to her leaving to her coming. So therefore I might think Mahavoya Bekesef, just like when it comes to Kiddushin, of course, you could be Mekadesh a woman Bekesef, Safitzi and Ami Bekesef. I might think that by divorce as well, you get divorced with money. So Kamash Malon, then no, you get divorced with a document. That is what the Rabbanon learn out from V'chasav. V'idach, so then how does Rabbi Yossi Aglili learn out that Davka, you're divorced with writing, not with money? Nafkale mi sefer Krisus. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, well, it says Sefer Krisus, Sefer Korsa, ve'lein davar acher Korsa. That no, it's writing. It's writing that causes the divorce, not anything else. Ve'idach, and the rabbis, what do they do with Sefer Krisus? Mibayle davra kores leveno. That the rabbis say, well, it has to be a complete dissolvement of the marriage, a complete separation. As we learn in the Brisa, for example, if the husband says, here's your bill of divorce, under the condition that you never ever drink wine anymore, ever again. Under the condition that you never ever go to your father's house anymore. That's not divorced, because he's basically maintaining control over her for the rest of her life. That's not a separation. That's not a complete separation, and that would not be a valid get. It has to be, right, Sefer Krisos. It has to be a complete separation. Ad Shloshim Yom, but if he says, here's your get, but you can't go to your father's house for 30 days, okay, Beseder, after 30 days, then at least it'll be a complete separation. Hareze Krisos. And so that is what the rabbis learn out from Sefer Krisos. Ve'idach, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Mikaris Krisos. Rabbi Yossi Aglili learns out from the fact that Krisos says Karis, but it says Krisos. That's how we learn out that it needs to be a complete krisus. V'idach karis krisus l'darshe. Whereas the rabbis, they don't have that drasha of it could have said karis, but it says krisus. They don't have that. They learn it out from Sefer Krisus. Friends, that was Daf Chaf Aleph of Masechta Gittin. There was some very interesting stuff about transferring possession. Right? For example, if you have this tablet that belongs to the wife, then he's giving it to her as a get, so we can assume that she was makneh to him. We then discussed interesting sugyas about the husband being able to give a get to an eved or in his chotzer, and then give the eved or the chotzer to his wife. Abaye had some kashas on that, and then we learned about some interesting halachas at the end regarding running Gittin on animals and having to have a complete separation. Some interesting stuff. That was Daf Chaf Aleph from Masechta Gittin. I hope you enjoy. Peace out.